We've experienced the great expansion of tools, and now we're experiencing what's going to be the great contraction of tools.
I think we're moving towards these systems of action more than ever.
Yes, I totally agree. You can kind of throw a rock in Silicon Valley and find somebody who will say, yo, you got to use Salesforce or you're going to get fired, because that's all they've ever known. They've never actually known a different way of doing things. But the next generation of co-founders and operators that I'm talking to have a huge appetite for finding new ways to do things. I've talked to a bunch of founders who are literally managing their pipeline out of Google Sheets and Notion. Revenue operators, especially at companies that are growing and scaling, need to think very carefully about how they manage their stack, because ultimately the stack is there to provide a value to the organization and help sellers be better at their job. If the stack becomes this unwieldy thing that actually is slowing down sellers and extracting more value from the organization that's giving, then that's a sign that like you've overdone it and you probably need to think about how you consolidate.
Behind the scenes, it was a small group of people that were doing everything.
Welcome back to the GTM podcast. It's your host, Scott Barker.
I want to know how this insane growth actually happened. It's no secret that AI is revolutionizing the way we work, and the B2B sales landscape is no exception. Meet Upland Altify, a leading provider of AI-enhanced sales solutions designed to help revenue teams work smarter. Large organizations around the world trust Altify to overcome sales challenges and simplify complex processes. This Salesforce-native suite of sales solutions empowers sellers' productivity, streamlines workflows, and uncovers hidden opportunity, all leading to significant revenue growth. Learn how Altify can maximize your Salesforce investment and transform your revenue team. Visit www.uplandsoftware.com/Altify to see Altify in action.
Hello and welcome everyone to the GTM podcast. Your host, Scott Barker here. Thank you, I say it every week, for lending us your eardrums for the next 45 minutes. There's a million places you can spend your time, but we do work hard to bring on the best guests, the best operators in go-to-market, the best founders, sometimes VCs, to really speak through their stories, things that are actively working for them right now, things that have worked in the past, and hopefully leave you with some ideas that you can take back to your respective organizations, because it is tough times out there. But excited for my next guest. I am joined by Austin. Hey, Austin, welcome, man.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Scott. I'm excited to be here.
Pumped to have you. And super quickly, I always like to go over just fast bios. So Austin is the co-founder at Clarify, which is a new intelligent CRM, which I'm excited to talk a little bit about. Also a partner and MarTech teacher at Reforge. Definitely check out his course. And a MarTech advisor and GTM investor at HBE Ventures. Previous to that, you spent some time at Brand with our mutual friend, Mike Molinet. And previous was the head of MarTech at Ramp during a super crucial period of growth. But man, you got a lot going on. How do you keep it all together?
Oh man, if I knew how, I would tell you. Checklists and a very supportive wife, which I feel like it's probably the answer for a lot of folks out there. Supportive partner and to-do lists.
Yeah. We just had Mark Gurmesian on, who was the CEO and founder of Braze and now runs a big venture firm out of New York. And that was like his number one piece of advice is surround yourself with good people and pick a great life partner and you'll be fine, which I thought was very simple, but hard to do sometimes. And you can be very lucky if you get it right.
Yeah. And I think especially as you get older and find yourself more deep in your career, you get to pick the people you spend time with, and you realize time is such a limited resource. And it's not like I think when you're younger, where you kind of can throw a rock and find new and interesting people that are aligned with your similarities and objectives. I think it does actually get harder. And so that point that Mark made around like, hey, find the right people, it requires active choice. And it's hard to do. So yeah, we can talk about this later, but one of the things I've been really fixated on this year is this idea of like creating community, creating the set of people that I want to spend the next 10 years with and learn with and grow with. And you mentioned when we just started, my friendship with Mike Molinet. He was my first boss, actually, my first manager at Branch. And we've grown into having a really great friendship, even through some hard times. It was hard when I left Branch as one of the first employees. But, you got to stick with the people who believe in you and where you have those shared memories and experiences with.
Totally. I think that is one of the most beautiful things about, tackling hard things when you're young and having some semblance of success. I think one of the most rewarding parts of that is being able to be a little bit more selective with who you build with, which is really, really cool. And I think, as you mentioned, like if you do it right through a long career, like careers are long, and so you and Mike had to part ways at Branch, but like who knows? He's building again, and your paths might cross again, and that's what's super cool about finding those people, is they typically come back around in some form or fashion.
Yeah. Yeah. There's this legendary COO I worked for named Dave Myers at mParticle. And he was always used to tell us, companies are temporary, relationships are, last a life. And that just has continued to serve me well as a piece of advice. You should have him on the podcast sometime. He's great.
Yeah, would love it. Would love an intro. Let's make it happen. All right, there's a ton I want to talk to you about, but I think where it makes sense to start, because you have kind of dedicated a large part of the last years understanding the MarTech landscape, kind of go to market tooling in general, sales tech, rev tech, MarTech, whatever you want to call it. And it seems like there's fundamental shifts that are happening. There is a lot of kind of incumbents I'm seeing, or there's still startups, but bigger players that are all kind of going horizontal and playing in each other's space. Simultaneously, there's a bunch of new AI entrants that are coming in and not confusing the market, but they're growing quite quickly. And then kind of see a lot of them plateau around 5-10 million ARR. So I'm not sure what's going to happen with all those tools. Are the problems they're solving just going to be solved by the bigger players? Buyers are thinking more and more about consolidation. There's more scrutiny on every dollar that's spent. I would love to hear just kind of your overview of where we're at right now in go to market tooling, because it seems, frankly, to be a little bit of a mess.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a mess. I just put out a piece with Kyle Poyer maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago that talked a lot about this problem. And, for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to blend MarTech and RevTech together. There's probably some specialist operators out there that are going to raise their hand and be like, hey, these things are separate, and they are in a lot of ways. But I think for a lot of companies in the B2B or B2B2C space that are small and don't have large teams, usually the decision maker who's owning MarTech and RevTech is the same person. And so I'll talk about them together. And I think you're right. We've experienced like the great expansion of tools, and now we're experiencing what's going to be the great contraction of tools. If you back up, 10 years, back to when I was first starting my career with Mike at Branch, I actually have this really great shitty diagram in the Kyle Poyer piece that I encourage people to look at, because the stack then is almost the exact same stack now. There's HubSpot and Salesforce and a bunch of tools connected to them. But that was really innovative, and it was really exceptional in 2014. The ability to collect website leads and create automated sequences and do outbounding and have a well-managed system that was running enrichment. I remember we were one of the first companies, I think, ever to integrate Clearbit's API natively in a backend system to enrich leads as they're coming into Salesforce. And there's still companies building that stack today. And so the point I'm making is that a lot of what we perceive, or even younger operators perceive as being frustrating and annoying, like it was born out of a lack of ability to do it, in the early days of RevTech stacks. Now, I think what happened though is Salesforce in particular built this great app ecosystem where anybody could plug in their tool or system and would provide additional functionality on top of Salesforce. And that was awesome. That led to the creation of a RevTech stack, like the golden stack as we see it. And for what it's worth, the same thing happened in MarTech. You had the CDP players back in 2014, 2015, 2016 building this idea that, hey, you plug in one SDK and then you can bring a lot of tools and services. You get more value with less work. And that's always been the promise, like, hey, one centralized system, one set of tools, lots of value. But, with additional tools comes greater complexity, and with greater complexity comes more management and overhead costs. And I think now there's just so many tools to do even small things that should actually live inside the CRM. One of the greatest examples I talk about, and I'm going to try not to put any vendors on the spot because I'm a big believer that, even if you disagree with somebody's point of view about the market, you should be kind to the people who are working behind these companies. And so there are tools that kind of manage data hygiene for Salesforce and HubSpot. And, my opinion is like, why doesn't that live inside the CRM? Why do you have to use a third party to manage what is effectively a database? And it's because, these app ecosystems have evolved over time, and those players have made active choices not to build that functionality inside the tool set itself. And I think we're seeing a little bit of that be unwound. Salesforce just announced like their AI solution, which we can talk about later because I have a lot of opinions. And HubSpot acquired Clearbit, and there's clearly an understanding that like, hey, yeah, enrichment should live inside the CRM because everybody is pulling leads and contacts into the CRM. And it's really silly that they have to go through multiple vendors and multiple hoops to basically provide that functionality out of box. Apollo is doing it for them. So the short of it is, yes, we experienced this great contraction, and now we're starting to see, we experienced this great expansion, and now we're starting to see the contraction coming. And at the same time, I would argue, as that expansion was occurring, what was really happening is that people were taking the complexity and moving it from developer to low code to maybe automated. And I think the next 5 to 10 years, we'll see stuff go from low code to possibly automated with AI. And we're like such at the infancy of it that when you see all these AI players, I think they have their eyes on the 10-year future, but what they're able to deliver today with the models that are available and the tooling that's available is fairly limited. And I'll give you a great example. Back 2 or 3 years ago when Mike actually was starting Athena, or maybe it was last April, I think, not 2 years ago, just quite. We had a conversation with him and Brendan on his team about like, what are all the tools you need to kind of set up a motion that would allow you to collect inbound and outbound 1,000 people a month, something like that. And we had a conversation, and I told them what we were doing at Ramp. We had a lot of homegrown solutions at Ramp. But he went out and bought 5 or 6 tools and hooked them up, like KeyPit, Play, Clay, Apollo, and maybe 2 or 3 other tools connected to Salesforce or HubSpot. And pretty quickly, they were able to start running outbound sequences and achieving those numbers. Now, I just caught up with Brendan last month, and he's like, what happened in that year since we talked is that they were so successful at it that then they just kept adding more and more tools to manage account management, tools to manage playbooks, tools to manage kind of every bespoke part of a sales process. And that's really powerful if you're a huge organization with a RevOps team of 20 people who can help manage that complexity. If you're a team of 3 sellers, that is not the way it's going to work for you. That it's going to go down really badly. And I think that was his point, is they found themselves having to unwind certain things because even if it was valuable, there just wasn't enough time in the day to manage the thing versus performing the task of doing sales. And so the kind of the punchline here is, I think like revenue operators, especially at companies that are growing and scaling, need to think very carefully about how they manage their stack. Because ultimately, the stack is there to serve a purpose. It's there to provide a value to the organization and help sellers be better at their job. If the stack becomes this unwieldy thing that actually is slowing down sellers and extracting more value from the organization that it's giving, then that's a sign that like you've overdone it and you probably need to think about how you consolidate. And I think in general, people right now are all feeling that way. Like there's a big like underlying feeling in the belly of a lot of operators that like, hey, our tools are not working for us, yet the prices are continuing to go up and up and up every year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can feel it. It's like palpable in the market right now. So going back to the Athena example, let's say I am a startup. I'm listening to this. I'm a founder or a new head of sales at a startup. What are those fundamental building blocks you can speak through companies or categories that I should get in place to help run an effective go-to-market motion. So you start with your CRM. That's still true. What's your next purchase after that?
Well, to be honest, I think like this is the interesting thing. And I'll make an analogy to MarTech here in a second. You know, what you said is it has always been true is like, hey, there's a playbook for this. Go get a CRM, then do inbound, then do outbound, then pile on other tools, right? And you can kind of throw a rock in Silicon Valley and find somebody who will say, "Yo, you got to use Salesforce, you're gonna get fired," or because that's all they've ever known. They've never actually known a different way of doing things. But the next generation of co-founders and operators that I'm talking to are eager and have a huge appetite for finding new ways to do things. A great example is I've talked to a bunch of founders who are literally managing their pipeline out of Google Sheets and Notion, who are using Clay and Apollo, and they're throwing on tools like Condo to manage their LinkedIn inbox. And this mirrors a lot, in my mind, what's happening in MarTech, which is like there used to be this standard approach, this playbook that you would follow if you were a B2C marketer. You get a CDP. Then once you have a CDP, you get an attribution tool. You plug in an email marketing tool like Braze or Iterable. You get a product analytics tool like Mixpanel or Amplitude. You pipe all that to the warehouse. You enrich it back to your data warehouse. And then tools like Census and HighTouch came along and kind of like blew the whole thing up and said, what if actually you can use your warehouse to be the source of truth for your data, and then you activate it out of the warehouse? So now it took what was this centralized thing, the CDP, and broke it into its component parts and said, you have data collection, you have data transmission, and you have capabilities. Those are kind of like the three core parts. It's data activation, retention, and transmission. And so the activation piece is the ability to create audiences and send them out to different networks or tools that you're going to be using it for. The bigger point there, even if you don't understand all that jargon, is like it took this core thing and broke it into component parts, and it enabled the whole market to say, actually, you can go build any stack you want. And I've seen this come true in the last 2 years. Like people are not following a standard playbook in MarTech. They could use Braze actually as their CDP. They could collect events with Braze, send them into Snowflake, and then activate them out of Snowflake with either Braze's audience connector, or they could use something like Census or HighTouch to send it out. I've seen people doing this actually from the early days with AppsFlyer, where like they used a CDP, but they used AppsFlyer to send audiences out to tools. And so what it forces, I think, good operators to do is work backwards from the problem. They say, hey, what are the problems we're trying to solve at this stage in our company's life cycle? Let's work backwards to the tools that we have and the tools that we know and want to use, and let's plug those into the different spots to find the final solution. And I think that is happening in RevTech now. We're seeing this come true, where it was like, hey, you have to have a CRM, and that CRM is going to do these 3 or 4 things, and then I'm going to go plug in other tools. Now we're seeing people say, like, what if I just used a totally different tool for my CRM for the time being? And what if I actually, instead of doing the standard playbook of SendGrid with Outreach, I try a new tool like Unify GTM? What if instead of having a type form for my lead submission thing connected to Chili Piper and a Zapier integration, what if I try something like Default? So I think what's happening is many of these bespoke pieces that were kind of like done in many different ways are now being codified into a complete set of solutions, and people are getting more value out of that. The challenge, though, I think, is like in RevTech, there are lots of disparate pieces that have overlapping capabilities. In MarTech, it's not the case as much. Like data collection is overlapping set, but it doesn't really matter who does data collection for you anymore as long as you get it into the warehouse. But like it kind of matters where you collect leads, because you don't want to collect leads in 5 different tools. That's what leads to tooling hell, is like if you have leads coming from Zapier and leads coming from LinkedIn and leads coming from HubSpot, they're all different formats. How do you kind of coalesce them into something that makes sense? And so I think like where I have the biggest question mark and where I'm like eager to see the market evolve is what are the big categories or groups of capabilities that make sense to live together? And where are people building in those spaces? And are we going to see a next generation of a RevTech stack that kind of mirrors the MarTech stack from a couple of years ago, where like you have a whole section called inbound, and maybe there's just one best-in-class tool that does like 6 different things for inbound. And maybe there's a next generation tool just for outbound, and it manages outbound on LinkedIn and on email and on personalized mail and a bunch of other things. it combines this idea of, hey, we have a category of what we're doing and we're going to combine tools together. So that's where I'm most eager. And I think the advice I would give for operators who are thinking about this stuff is like, don't get overly wed to try to limit as many tools as you can, especially early on in your life cycle. I mean, if I've seen anything, it's that people kind of like don't work backwards from problems. They just effectively choose tools because they've used a tool in the past. And so they just throw a solution in there because it's familiar. When really what they should be doing is being a little bit more thoughtful and say, hey, here's the problem we need to solve. We need to collect leads. What are like the 5 different ways we collect leads? Let's consider those now and choose the one that has like the lowest path to resistance and also is going to provide the least amount of complexity in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In your eyes, does it even make sense right now if you're a startup building your stack and maybe you don't know what you don't know yet to do the standard sign up a contract for a year? Like, is that an outdated way of thinking? Should you be pushing for a 3-month contract, 6-month contract, so you're not locked into some of these expensive tools that, you may find a cheaper, better solution to solve the core problem that you're trying to solve?
It's a great point. I feel like signing yearly contracts when you're a young startup makes a lot of sense when you have high conviction and you can save money because of that high conviction. If you don't have high conviction about something, yeah, you absolutely should be avoiding yearly contracts. A great example at Clarify is obviously we have some enrichment providers that we work with, and it's like that's a core part of our business model. Is like the ability to help our customers enrich their data without having them have to go out and buy a bunch of data providers. And so we have high conviction there. And so if you have something similarly high conviction, you should spend the money to save yourself the time and money. Another example would be like, if you don't want to build an authentication platform, you use something like Auth0 or, something like that. Yeah, you should probably sign an annual contract to save yourself money. It all comes down to like, is this a replaceable piece of your technology stack? And, are the savings kind of going to outweigh what it's going to cost you to have to switch later?
And a quick pause to hear from our friends at Vanta. We've all been there. Your deal is almost closed, and all that's left is the security review. But when it comes to those lengthy security questionnaires, the endless back and forth between you, your security team, and the customer can often cause deals to stall out, leaving your deal at risk and dollars on the table. With Vanta questionnaire automation, go-to-market teams can complete security reviews up to 5 times faster, helping you close deals in less time than ever. Over 8,000 global companies like ZoomInfo, SmartRecruiters, and Noibu use Vanta to streamline security questionnaires and close deals faster. Visit vanta.com/GTM now to learn more about questionnaire automation. That's VANTA.com/GTMNOW. Now, back to the episode. So I want to spend a little bit of time on Clarify, just because, with the knowledge that you have and the understanding you have of the MarTech and the RevTech landscape, you make the crazy decision to attack CRM, it's a big space. We've talked about these like monster players that have kind of just been de facto for so long. You get Salesforce, HubSpot, and you looked around, you're like, hey, there's a better way to do this. Talk me through some of because you're building the CRM that you would build in 2024. And what does that look like? Is it largely hinged on this idea that data and enrichment and a lot of these things that we sometimes have 5 or 6 different vendors for to pipe into our CRM should live right within our CRM?
Yeah, happy to talk about Clarify. And first, I'd say, look, a lot of people have been trying to crack the CRM space for a long time, and it was certainly a question we got asked by investors because there's Copper, there's Pipedrive, there's Close.com, there was Salesforce IQ that sold. Like the road to defeating somebody like Salesforce has been littered with failures. And even if you don't consider a company a failure, nobody has reached the market size and cap of anybody like Salesforce except for HubSpot. And so regardless of whether the business, maybe that's some harsh language, but like nobody has been able to achieve multi-billion dollars in CRM except for, HubSpot, right? And maybe Vivo if you look at Viva. So I think like when I was considering the problem, the first thing that came to mind is that if you just set up to build a better CRM that looks exactly like the CRM that exists today, you're not going to build a $1 billion company. You may be successful. You may generate a $100 million company, $200 million company. You're not going to kind of dramatically change the way that people operate. So that was the first thing. The second thing is I had been consulting in MarTech for 10 years, and I had this great opportunity to work at Ramp where I was exposed to a lot more of how RevTech operates in what I would consider a B2B2C environment. Even though Ramp is purely B2B, the top of our funnel acted like a B2C funnel. We were targeting ads with people, trying to drive them to sign up for credit cards or to have them tell the right person at their company to sign up for a credit card. And so you have this like weird Frankenstack where top mirrors everything I had known and bottom had mirrored everything I had learned being an enterprise rep when I was at Branch. So it was this really cool environment where I just got to like see how much things had changed since when I had been building a stack at Branch to now. And one of the biggest observations, well, maybe I'll share a couple observations. The first is like, Ramp sets the standard and really holds the standard for building a best-in-class stack through the use of their engineering team. And I think anybody who says they want to be like Ramp needs to like look themselves in the mirror and say, like, am I willing to invest the resources from engineering to do that? Ramp was incredible in resourcing their RevTech operation. One of their co-founders, Gene, he's the head of growth engineering, but the stack, the tools, everything that made that machine work lived, inside the company. It was not outsourced to third parties like contractors and consultants. Similarly, our web engineering team took a very heavy role in managing the RevTech stack, and we grew that over time. And so I think that was like one of the most important things for me as I left the organization and considered Clarify is like, I think the future best companies are going to be building their revenue technology stacks in-house. And what that means is that if you want to build a next-gen CRM, you need to build a platform and set of tools that developers love. You have to build something that's not just good for revenue operators, but the peers that they work with every day. I mean, I had these phenomenal engineers that I got to work with at Ramp, where if we needed to set up a backend service, change events, modify ways that data were flowing into the stack, they were not only happy to help, but they could help because it was written in a language we could control. And so, Salesforce has written this language called Apex. The reason why I think a lot of organizations are stuck on Salesforce is because, the number of engineers that can write Apex code is going down, and the number of engineers who like to write Apex code has never been that high in the first place. It's not like, this attracts like the world's best talent. The world's best talent is writing in languages that are much more consumable, like JavaScript and Python. So that was the second piece. First is like, got to do something different. Second is you got to build a platform that developers are going to love. And now we get to this third piece, which is, a little more amorphous. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention something about AI. But the third piece is that, we struggled, I think, at Ramp to unify MarTech and RevTech into a single set of tools and also operationally a single stack. And that's because like some of it is data model limited. MarTech has user objects and events. CRMs do not comprehend events. HubSpot is really the first one that does, and they just updated a lot of their APIs and their infrastructure to handle it better. But when I was at Ramp, for example, they wouldn't accept a event property on an event. What that means is like, say somebody goes to your website and looks at a page. All you could send to HubSpot was a page view. And so for the longest time when I was at Ramp, you couldn't see which page view, what's the metadata associated with that page, because the CRM was not designed to handle that. Again, I'm pretty sure they've updated that, and I did promise you I wouldn't get too much into, vendor smack talk. But, to be clear, Salesforce doesn't support this object model at all. Anybody who's kind of worth their snuff is pulling all that data from CDP and CRM into the warehouse, and then they have to marry it themselves. They have to invest in a data engineering team to do it. And so this third thing for me is like, hey, I want to build a tool that has the data model and infrastructure to allow both marketing and revenue teams to speak the same language and have the same data in the same spot. And what that really means is that you have to build an object orientation that allows for custom objects. And you have to build an event stream that allows you to collect events. You have to be able to not just manage a static database that's changing, but you have to be able to accept data of people performing actions and tie that to the static user records. And I think like a lot of CRMs are not considering this. A lot of the people who are building CRMs don't have the expertise to build this, and they've never experienced the use cases that B2B2C businesses bring with them. And a large observation that I've had over the last 5 years is that more and more businesses are becoming B2B2C. Because when you work classically B2B, you say to yourself, look, if somebody can use this tool as a personal team, I'm going to offer to them in a B2C motion. And now I can have great top of funnel from small inbound and great bottom of funnel from big enterprise. So that's the third observation. And, obviously a lot of people are, of course, focused on AI. And I want to make a point about this because, we're actively not talking too much about AI because we don't want to try to overhype people that AI is going to change the world instantly. And that's going to be the thing that changes CRM. There are tons of things that we're doing in our tool that involve AI and natural language processing. For example, in Clarify, you can ask a question about creating views, and we will actually run SQL in the background and reconstruct that view for you. There's lots of other cool ideas that I can talk about too. But AI is just a piece of it. And where I think the future for AI that holds the most potential is actually the ability to take unstructured data from a variety of channels, from video recordings, calls, emails, transcripts, voice memos, text messages, LinkedIn messages, and not only provide a summary, like that's what we're doing today. Everybody has the summaries, but actually provide what is the recommended next step. And can you go take that step for me? Every single day for the last, 180 days, for the last half year since we've been Clarify, we've heard from founders that say, I want a CRM that acts as an extension of my brain. I want a CRM that operates as if it knows everything that I know and doesn't just say, hey, I have a task due, but it actually goes to the next step of trying to perform that task for me. Or if it can't, it recommends it in a way that's not going to stress me out. Like it's not just a wall of missed task notifications every day. It suggests maybe 2 or 3 a day. That way I actually do them. It puts them in my inbox or it puts them in Slack, depending on my preferences. So again, I think the CRM tomorrow is actually first and foremost just a better product experience. It's saying like, hey, imagine if you designed a tool like Linear for CRM. Imagine you design a tool like Ramp for CRM. Being smarter about the innate product choices, I think, is step number one. And then as AI technology evolves over the next 5 years, there's going to be a lot of opportunity to automate tasks. I don't think we're there yet. And I think anybody who's promising that is actually just, probably just trying to get a higher VC raise.
Totally. I see it all the time. It's in most slide decks these days. Yeah, I mean, something you said there, it hit home and reminded me of, the 4 years I spent at Outreach. I think a lot of RevTech, what we were driving towards, at least back then, was like, can we serve up the next best action for our sellers? Like that was the golden, it's what we're all aspiring to. We're going to collect all this data, we're going to drive these insights, and then you just go to this tool and it's going to tell you the next best action that you have to take. And it feels like now we've gone a step further of where the holy grail is identifying the next best action and being able to actually take that action for you if you so wish, which is a pretty big fundamental shift.
It is, and again, this is not to lay it on the existing CRM players because they have a lot to manage with an existing technology stack, but you have existing calendar integrations, you have existing email integrations. Why can't you just look at emails and calendar and create a task that says, you had a call with this person, and in the call, you said that you were going to follow up. Let me just draft an email with literally what you said in the call. Like that's not even AI. That's just automation. Maybe you can say it's AI because you're scraping data from transcripts and being smart about it. But even if you're not being smart, just like extract, I'll follow up, like literally those words from transcripts, and you get a pretty decent model for the types of follow-ups that you need to do. And I think what makes me sad is like, this opportunity is the greatest for existing CRMs. And I think if they did this, a lot of people would be really happy. But as you saw, the recent Salesforce announcements with Einstein AI, like it's a lot of vaporware. It's like, hey, everybody's gonna have their own AI assistant, and it's gonna send emails for you, but it's gonna come from an AI agent and be labeled as an AI agent. And I'll tell you what, if I got an AI agent emailing me, I would delete the fucking email. It's like nobody wants that
Or
experience.
get my AI agent to deal with it. My AI agent, talk to that AI agent and deal with it and tell me if it's important.
Sent from Danny's AI agent, like it just, it misses the point, which is that people don't want a separate entity to operate for them. They want their CRM to, again, act as an extension of themselves and go almost to the last mile. It's like, hey, maybe I don't trust you yet to send the email for me because AI hasn't figured out what to say. Draft the email, put it in my inbox, and then tell me you have 10 drafts to review today. That's going to be a lot more helpful than having a bot send an email, that the person that's just going to piss the person off,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Salesforce is always going to do what Salesforce does and make a big announcement and, give it away for cheap to a lot of their customer base. A lot of people will switch over, and then 9 months later, they all switch back. I'm like, all right, that didn't work. We've seen that story many times.
I know. And I mean, this is, related to one of the reasons why Patrick, one of my co-founders, Patrick Thompson, and Andre, they both worked at Amplitude for a couple of years. They built a data schema provider called Iteratively. Before that, Pat worked at Atlassian, and Andre, I think this is his fourth company. So they have really, really storied co-founders. But one of the things that we talked a lot about was this idea that, we want to build a set of tools that actually provides value. And I think when I think about this AI experience, it's like, it's not actually providing value to operators. And if you throw a rock, I use this expression a lot, like throw a rock in Silicon Valley. I hope nobody actually goes and throws rocks. It's not a great approach, but like, you can throw a rock in Silicon Valley, and you'll find somebody that says this phrase like, everybody hates Salesforce. I mean, we didn't put this on LinkedIn because, again, like, I don't want to stoke a lot of criticism, but like a lot of the folks we talk to express outrage at Salesforce in particular. And it's harsh because, like, I think Salesforce is an amazing company and they've built incredible tools and technology. What they're really expressing, though, is this idea that like things just haven't changed. And back to the main point, like Andre, Patrick, and I like really felt deeply like there was such an opportunity for existing CRM providers to build an amazing solution with just a small number of tweaks. And I think we've all been waiting for that. We've all been waiting for the moment where Salesforce like maybe makes their experience 1 second faster. And that actually is like, it's a massive difference for all the operators who use Salesforce every day. But it hasn't come true. And so I think as we consider like why we built Clarify and why we're interested in the CRM space in general is like, there are so many operators who care deeply about the revenue stack and care deeply about their sales teams. And they see these solutions coming out, and maybe for market analysts, for the leaders of organizations who are signing those Salesforce deals, Salesforce is great. But for the operators, for the RevTech people, for revenue ops folks, again, there's this deep feeling of disdain that's been building and brewing for the last 5 years where folks want a better solution, and Salesforce might not be the best solution anymore. And there's a lot of talk going around about, can you use HubSpot? And it's the same cat flavor, I think, of kind of concern. And the next wave of operators is coming, and we just want to be prepared to help those people.
We're going to take a quick pause from this interview to talk about hiring. Hiring for startups is really hard. You are battling the attention of smart, driven people, being bombarded with a ton of opportunities. Plus, it can be time-consuming going through all the candidates and challenging to know who is the best fit. Should you hire the person who's been there, done that? The up-and-comer stepping into the bigger role for the first time? Is stage fit or domain expertise more important for this particular role? Most recruiting firms fill an order. For us, we highly recommend IPS. They are just a different breed of search firm. They've dug into your business to understand its current state and the future vision, and are relentless in their pursuit of finding the very best leaders, salespeople, marketers, engineering talent that you need. Integrity Power Search has placed over 2,000 candidates for early to mid-stage startups in its 12-year history. with specialists that focus by function, leveling from mid-level ICs all the way up to the C level. All right, so with a very senior team, I've met them all. They're pretty rad, including past startup operators. They've seen firsthand the change of trajectory your company can take when you are intentional and aggressive about bringing the right people at the right time. So whether you want advice, have one hard to fill role, or you have a full team build out, we can't recommend IPS enough. Visit Integrity Power Search. That's www.integritypowersearch.com to learn more or connect with them on your next search. We talked a lot about, this idea of, CRM still just being like a system of record. But over time, we're going to have these systems of actions that actually help operators do their job more effectively. And if you play that story out, like wherever the actions are taking place, there will be a mark of those actions. Therefore, that place where the actions are taking place becomes the system of record. And do you need a separate system of record if the actions are taking place in your system? And so I think we're moving towards these systems of action more than ever.
Yes, I totally agree. It's just it's funny because it's this like perplexing question of like even if that's true, there's lots of systems action. There's Gong, there's Outreach, there's Qualified. There's many examples, and it's like why haven't any of these been successful as becoming CRMs? And I think this is the point I was trying to make earlier, and I was like stumbling around it, which is there's become such an expectation that you have to have a CRM and that there's only a few choices for that CRM. And I don't know if that's a good assumption anymore. I don't know if we move to a world where anybody can be a CRM. I mean, kind of like in the MarTech ecosystem, I think a lot of tools can be CDPs because fundamentally the ability to be a CDP was the ability to collect data, federate data, and activate it. And you can collect data with a lot of tools, you can federate data with lots of tools, and you can activate it, meaning activate to create audiences. So like each of those components has been broken and shifted to tools. So it makes a lot of sense that you could actually construct a stack where you have a CDP that it is another tool. The problem with the CRM is like it requires custom objects, and not all tools have custom objects. So it's actually an infrastructure choice problem. And so the question on my mind is like, what if like every upcoming go-to-market tool built a custom data model that allowed you to have people and contacts and companies and some other entity, and you could create relationships between all those? Well, it's not going to happen because that's a huge amount of complexity and overhead that you don't need if you're just building a simple tool. So I think that's maybe some of the difference that I'm seeing and feeling between MarTech and RevTech is like, in MarTech, a lot of companies evolved to take on CDP capabilities because they had to. You have to collect users and events to do anything in marketing. But in go-to-market, with a static system of record, you only build the objects that are required for most businesses. But the problem is over time, as businesses evolve, they need more complexity. And if your infrastructure can only handle one custom object, and doesn't have the ability to handle events, you kind of move yourself into a world where you can't actually cater to these more complex business use cases. I mean, the example of Gong and Outreach come to mind. It's like Outreach wasn't thinking about marketing emails when they were building Outreach. They were thinking about outbound emails. And like, so I wonder what are the assumptions that companies are making today about what the experience is going to be, and how will that play out over the next 5 to 6 years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You mentioned something there that got me thinking too, is the future of a system of record, I think will also need to not only have these custom objects, but how do those custom objects like relate to one another? I think we're all looking for like best path in, and like, you could have just signed a buyer who is like best friends or worked with someone that had just did a website view, and like that information of how they relate to one another is extremely, extremely helpful. And I don't think this like relationship graphing, we'll call it, we haven't gone very far down that route, but whoever cracks that, I think will fundamentally shift how we go to market.
There's two things I want to bring up with that. First is it's really hard. LinkedIn is a walled garden. I mean, Cabal's doing an amazing job, I think, of this. They're like trying to get the value out of LinkedIn, but it's still really hard. And more than ever, especially with the next generation, context is living in many different spots. It's in WhatsApp, it's in iMessage, it's in voice memos. And so one of the ways that Patrick and I are thinking about Clarify is like, hey, it's not enough just to say we're going to have unstructured data and that unstructured data is call data. It's like anything. It's like a photo that you can run OCR against. It's a voice memo. It's text messages. It's, you have to be willing to believe that there are going to be more channels for data, and that relationship graph is not going to just be what you think of today. It's going to be many different channels, and actually need to design the system to handle unknown sources of data that will evolve in the next 5 years. So that to me is like a really important piece. The second thing is, I think even before we solve that problem, there's this basic object orientation problem, which is like, hey, we dealt with this at Ramp. And I know there's one particular person who I'm sure will listen to this and is going to laugh. So, every team at some point in their lifetime, if you're a B2B company, you have sales, you have marketing, and then comes the third child, which is BD and partnerships. And usually by that moment in time, the technology stack has already been set up to cater towards sales and marketing. So there's this question of how do you model data correctly for partnerships inside the CRM and inside the CDP? And it's often left until the very end of a company's life cycle, not only because it's the third thing to evolve in a company's growth, but it's usually not the highest driver of value. Not to like put any partnerships on the spot, but it's like it's always a sub part or a fraction of sales. Partnerships driving $5 million of a $40 million total. There are obviously businesses where that's completely different, but at least in my experience, partnerships always provides a piece of a larger department. But there's no good way to model it. Like you have contacts as an example. You have contacts in the CRM. Is it a partnership contact, or is it a marketing contact, or is it a sales contact? You have reps that work deals and need to know, but there's no easy way to do it unless you brute force it. In Salesforce, there's literally a contact object. The best you can do is create a type. You can call it like a partnership contact or a sales contact. What you actually need is like two completely separate objects, a partnership person and a salesperson. They're completely separate objects with separate fields. They can be linked together and they can inherit fields from one another. And you can say, hey, when a person is created and somebody looks up that record from BD, we'll create the record and we'll link the two together. That way we know, hey, it's the same person, but they have different properties depending on the use case. It's the same object. It's nested under a giant schema of people, but they're totally different. And they're used in different use cases and they can have different properties. And this is the exact same thing happening in marketing. In marketing, you have what's called a marketing qualified lead. Then a marketing qualified lead becomes a sales qualified lead. And the way that we're handling this today is we're putting fields on a core object. So we're making the solution based on an architecture that was 10 to 20 years old. Actually, you need a completely separate object. You need an attribution object. The attribution object doesn't care whether it's a partnership lead or a sales lead. It cares, hey, what was the source of attribution? Where did it come from? How am I going to give credit to this? Let me create an object that can link the person and the source of marketing events together. That way we can do the modeling correctly in a downstream system. And so I think before you even solve the unstructured data problems, there are these really, really basic problems that if you can figure out how to model correctly inside the CRM and do it out of box, you provide so much value for thousands and thousands of businesses who are basically figuring this out on their own, and they're doing the same thing. They're either hiring consultancies or building it themselves. And this gets back to the maybe one of the meta points that I experienced with RevTech is it seems like we're all building the same stack, bespoke and ad hoc, thousands and thousands of times. And it's why don't you just put that into a playbook and ingest it into the CRM so people don't have to build it anymore?
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. And I could wrestle with this with you all day, and we could probably have a 3-hour discussion. And I'm very happy that we have minds like yours that are focused on this. And the future that you're describing is one we need to get to, and we'll just cut down so much internal pain for companies and let them focus on what they want to do, which is the problem that they solve in the market versus having to spend so much time, figuring out their internal stack. But I do want to shift gears a little bit. So we love to hear stories on this podcast. We again and again from our listeners, they learn the most through stories, and I would love it if you could just share kind of one of the more impactful moments of your career.
One of the more impactful moments of my career. This is a generalization, but I think it's good advice to a lot of founders out there because it sticks with me. And that is how you think about leaving organizations, and as a founder, how you think about treating people when they leave an organization indicates a lot about how you're perceived as a person and as a company. So here's the story. I've left a lot of organizations because I've stayed, at Branch for 2.5 years, mParticle for 2.5 years, Runway for 2.5 years, Ramp for 2 years. I never set out to do that, by the way. It just happened. I felt like usually around the time where I felt like I wasn't learning or there was an exciting opportunity, I felt like I needed or required for myself to go out and experience new things. And so I've moved through a handful of organizations, and, not all founders treat people the same when you leave. And again, this is not a criticism of any of those companies, but I wasn't treated the same when I left those 4 startups. And it stuck with me. That meta point of how a founder treats you when you leave makes a really important point about how you build a company and how you move through your career. Again, not everybody does things perfectly. I think lots of people leave in imperfect ways. They set things on fire. They don't do the best job they can. But more often than not, I think there's just a lot of emotions in startups and businesses, and people often take it very personally when somebody leaves an organization. Even if there's really valid reasons, or even if there's not valid reasons, they tend to get angry. And I think one of the formative experiences or points I've developed is like, we're all on this journey in life together. We're all learning. Lots of people make mistakes. Lots of people join organizations for reasons that don't become true. Lots of people leave organizations sometimes by mistake. And that's like why the term boomerang exists. So as you move through the world, remembering that at the end of the day, your employees and the people you work with are human, and to like treat them with dignity and respect because they made a bet to come and work for you, and they dedicated a portion of their lives thinking about your company and spending time for you. Like, remembering that when people leave your organization is a really important point that I wish more founders remembered. And it stuck with me in particular. We haven't had anybody leave or clarify yet, but I just think a lot about my employees as humans. And I think to myself, like, we will lose some of these great people one day. They will have great opportunities, or maybe we will not have served them well and they'll be upset. But at the end of the day, they're all people. And it's my job as a person to like honor the experiences I've had and try to make the best possible experience for them, even if they're choosing to not have that road lead to us anymore. So that's kind of like one of the most impactful things in my career is just like leaving a job and being compassionate about it has really resonated with me.
I love that. Such a great point. I mean, like, beginnings and endings in anything are so incredibly important. And I actually had a conversation with a friend the other day who's going through a breakup. And if you've ever gone through breakups, you can learn sometimes more about that human in the way it ends than you did the 5-10 years you were with them. And I think they even said, like, I wish I could like somehow simulate a breakup with with like a new partner and like see how we both handle that, because I think that shows so much of character and who you are when things kind of end.
Yeah. And to be honest, and I think this requires a lot of introspection and harsh truths that people don't often want to evaluate, but like how somebody treats you after you're gone is often an indicator of, I think, your own behaviors and actions in an organization. And that can be hard to stare at sometimes. It's not always the truth, right? Every relationship is 50-50. And there's going to be some people who won't give you the light of day after you leave an organization because they're mad at you or whatever. But sometimes they might give you the light of the day because of the way that you behaved. And I think like that's a really important point too for people to consider is like, hey, I want to move through the world. Not only do I expect or want to receive that type of grace from my founders, my employees, my peers, but I want to, and I should expect myself to give that grace to other people. And that means like, again, even in the heat of the moment, even in like these really deep, dark places where sometimes we're fed up because our job sucks and we have too much work and things are going poor, just remember that like you want to be able to have a relationship with these people after you're gone from an organization. And so being thoughtful about that and trying to do the best you possibly can, being transparent, being open, being honest, being helpful, the more you can do to just be a good fucking human being, the more you're going to kind of receive that energy back from the people that you're working with.
Totally.
I don't know. By the way, I don't know if I'm allowed to curse. I'm sorry. You can bleep me out.
you can curse. You can curse. No worries. I do it from time to time. No, I love that. I think it's been one of like the highlights of my professional career is like holding these. I think every single person I've ever worked for, whether it was a CEO, founder, or a direct report, I still am so close with and have learned incredible amounts after the fact, maybe even more sometimes from them. So the learning never stops. There's always opportunities to work together in the future. So I think that's a great point. I have two final questions for you, and then we'll wrap up. And I keep these the same every episode. They are intentionally vague, so you can take them anywhere you want. First question is, what is one widely held belief that founders or marketing leaders believe to be true that you think is bullshit or no longer serving us?
I think what a lot of founders and startups do today is they believe that they basically believe that in order to be successful, you have to create this perception of success, right? I mean, I see this all the time, especially on LinkedIn. This is like on my head right now. I was thinking about this on my run today. It's like you see founders posting every 2 days on LinkedIn about something, and I admire it. I admire it a lot. But then I think like there have been thousands of successful businesses that have been created where founders don't post jack shit on LinkedIn. So I think a commonly held belief is that as a founder or an executive, that you have to build this perception and market. And the only way to be successful is by like building it. But I believe actually the way that you work, the way that you treat people, the insights that you deliver to the market are far more important than like your frequency, right? We talked about this too earlier. It's like what do you want to be known for? Like how do you want to be perceived by people? And I think again, there's this false belief that in order to be successful as an operator at a company, that you need to project, in the market and in many spaces as you can. And actually, I think the opposite, which is like be very choosy or selective about how you spend your time and energy in seeking that perception and market. And so a practical application of this is like, do you choose to post on LinkedIn 3 times a week? Or do you write a blog post that details exactly what's in your head and have conversations with 5 of the most important people that are going to help your business? And I think that if you ask a lot of founders, it's like, hey, in order to be successful, you got to do the first thing. You got to get like 10,000 LinkedIn followers, and you have to have a Twitter profile, and you have to make sure that you're posting on LinkedIn all the time, and you have to make sure that you show up at the conference events. And I think like increasingly I'm of the belief that all that stuff is just a distraction from the real work to be done. The real work to be done is to be talking to your customers, to be talking to, if it's your VCs, maybe the people who know business better than you to get advice. It's talking to your teammates and building those relationships. If you do those things, you'll have plenty of content to put online. But if you just focus on the perception, like the act of being out there, you're missing out on all the valuable work that's actually needs to be happening behind the scenes in the business. So that's like, I think, one of my widely held beliefs. And again, the reason I'm thinking about this is because this has been one of Patrick and I's shared experiences, is like, we look around the market and like there's a lot of competition, and competition drives you to consider silly things like, do we need to compete? Do we need to be posting on LinkedIn? Do we need to be active on Twitter? Should we be showing up at the conference events? And it's like, look, at the end of the day, if you don't build a product that people love, it doesn't matter where you are. So that's kind of one of my strongly held beliefs, is like, don't focus on marketing for the sake of being out in the market. Focus on marketing because you have something awesome to share.
Yeah, I like it. It's a great take and a good reminder. I feel like there is so many people beating the drum of founder-led brand, and you got to get on LinkedIn or you're never going to make it. And frankly, it's someone said this to me a long time ago, and it was along the lines of like, your personal brand or your company brand, it's not what you say. It's like, it's what's said about you behind closed doors. And that is where the magic is. And people don't behind closed doors say, oh yeah, did you see that LinkedIn post that Austin did? They're like, no, I worked with Austin on this project and he fucking kicked ass. And he's a hustler, he gets it done. And those are the things you can control by just doing great work and treating other humans the right way. So I like that call out.
There's a really, I'm butchering this quote, but I remember it because so my partner works at A16Z, so I get a lot of like cool Ben and Mark quotes because she hears them and then she'll share them with me.
And they got a lot.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good ones. It's just like constant good ones. So I think one of the most recent ones I've heard is like, culture is not what you say, it's what you do. And I think that it applies 1-to-1 with what you just said, which is like, again, perception, market, brand, your company is not what you say, it's what you do. It's how you appear and show up and treat people. And increasingly, I've just like remembered that. And it's just the little things in life that I think drive it out of you. So it just is one classic example. Like anybody who's worked with me know that for the long period of my life, like I was just chronically late to meetings, and I take full responsibility for it. But I would do this. I would have one of those days that's back to back, 30-minute blocks from like 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And I was like, look at how efficient I am. And I do that for like 3 days straight. But then you get tired, or you need a snack, you need a bio break, somebody runs late, and all of a sudden now you're mistreating the people below you. All the people who come next are kind of getting a disservice from you just not being thoughtful about how you spend your time. And so like, it's one of the things I've worked on. But like, that's a great example where it's not what you say. You can apologize, you can complain that you're busy and everything else. It's just like, at the end of the day, you're responsible for your actions. So if you want people to have respect for you, show up and do the right thing.
Yeah, totally. And unfortunately, this podcast is running long, so I might make you late for your next meeting, but you can blame that on me.
Fine.
But wrapping up, so final question. People always ask, what's the one thing I can do right now? It's hard out there, and we know there's no silver bullets, but what is just one tactic, go-to-market tactic, strategy that is actively working right now for Clarify?
Yeah. Before I answer, I will tell you, I booked 2 hours for this with 30 minutes on each side because
hell yeah, I love that. You're learning. I'm learning. I love it.
Slowly. I was still late to 2 meetings with my founders yesterday, but it's baby steps.
Hell yeah.
One tactic or strategy that's working for us. I can share a couple, because one puts a lot of pressure on that to be good. And what if people don't agree? I got to give people a little bit more. The first thing I would say, which is, like maybe obvious, but just needs to be said, is when you hire people, hire for people that you want to work with. like it just sounds so obvious and silly, but it's like when you're a small team of 10 to 15 people, the only thing that matters really is building a great product. And, you know, you're going to have a lot more fun building a product and getting through the stressful situations of life if you're working with people who you genuinely like to work with. So not everybody has this luxury. I mean, we're fortunate in that we had a great network and we had people that we had worked with previously. And we just followed that. We said, like, the first 10 employees we're going to hire, we're going to try to hire from people that we've worked with in the past where it's like, we love working with them. And we're going to have a great time building a company, because if at the end of the day, this company goes under and we have nothing left to have for it, if we have great memories with people that we love, like, that makes the whole experience worth it, you know? So that's one thing. Second thing I would say related to my comments around perception is, like, a lot of founders, and I think a lot of companies, and even mid-stage companies, late-stage companies, this is not just startups, they focus way too much on doing many things poorly versus a few things really well. Again, super obvious. Like, this is not the first time somebody has said this, but I've been experiencing this a lot recently as Clarify, where we have the ability to work on many different projects, but the depth that we can go to is fairly limited. And so we're treating marketing a lot more like a product team, in that we're evaluating bets and we're trying to make a few big bets as opposed to many small bets. Because many small bets is not going to really change the product, but a few big bets could dramatically change the way that people perceive the product. And in this case, the product is our brand, it's our reputation, it's our voice and market. So that's the second piece of advice. And the third thing, which I don't necessarily think I've cracked, but I think is working really well for us, is this idea that brand is effectively a really important part of your company. And so being thoughtful to the future of what you want to build your brand to be, and then working backwards to consider how pieces fit into that, can be very helpful in, like, getting out of the rigmarole of just, like, marketing for the sake of marketing. Again, I mean, I feel like all three of these things are not necessarily unique pieces of advice. They're things that lots of other people have heard before, but it's about the context in which they're applied. So in particular on this brand idea, I think a lot of people say, hey, we'll worry about brand when we have the time and the money. We'll worry about, like, that's a Series A, Series B problem. But what I'm feeling right now is like, no, it's not. It's like a Series Now problem, because it's going to permeate the people that you hire. It's going to, like, and everything that you do takes on a piece of that life and kind of lingers on. And so you should be thoughtful early in your life cycle about, hey, like, how do you want to be perceived by people? And it's not just our color scheme and our logo. It's how you talk, how you act, how you show up, what you think is cool, what you do. And I'll give you an example, because brand is not just external, it's also internal. Like, if I were to characterize ourselves, I think we're a bunch of, like, kind of goofy, outdoorsy, laid back people who love both intellect and non-intellectual activities. So, like, we have runners and hikers and fitness jockeys and also people who are just, like, there to be outside, and people who do yoga. But, like, it's an important part of our lifeblood as a company to, like, value physical well-being. And we also, like, value entertainment. Like, we play games every Friday, and it's not just like Scribble.io. It's like we're playing StarCraft. You know, it's like we're a bunch of nerds sometimes. But
I love it.
what I'm saying here is, like, figure out who you are as a company and embrace it early. If not, you're going to be running to catch up with it later. And so that's another piece of, I think, that's working for us, is, like, we all kind of identify with who we are right now. And I'm sure that will change over time as we bring more people into the fold and we have a more diverse set of employees. But I'm really grateful that I know who we are, because it, like, gives me confidence that we're operating the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. I look at, like, brand and culture as, and I say this frequently, it's like throwing up a beacon for interesting people and interesting problems to find you that relate to that beacon you put up. And so if you're not super intentional with that beacon, it can go the opposite way too. You're attracting problems, you're attracting people that aren't of the core DNA that you're trying to accomplish. Um, well, Austin, this has been awesome, man. I would encourage everyone to go check out Clarify, doing some really, really cool stuff. Are you hiring? Anything you want to shout out before I let you go?
We're not hiring. Well, let me recharacterize that because that's not helpful. We've met our hiring goals for the quarter. We're always looking for incredible people. So encourage everybody to apply. Just want to set expectations with folk that we don't have a bunch of really active roles that we're hiring for immediately. We're still taking applications for folks. We might be hiring more in the next quarter. But I think if people are trying to be helpful to listen to this and saying, what can I do? How can I get involved? There's kind of 2 or 3 things. The first is if you're working at a kind of small SMB startup, 10 to 20 people, a couple million ARR, and you're not satisfied with HubSpot or the alternatives out there or Salesforce, the alternatives out there, get in touch with us because we are running pilots. We have a wait list, but we can bump people up and bring them in, especially if you love this podcast. So that's the first thing. Looking for additional design pilots to come onto our rolling cohorts. Second thing is we're building in the RevOps community. And we have a program that we're releasing in the fall to help rev operators think about all these problems. A revenue technology program to educate people, much like the MarTech program at Reforge. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, man, all this stuff makes a lot of sense. I want to be involved. I want to talk about these problems more. Would love to hear from you. We're looking for revenue ops, RevTech, BizTech, MarTech operators to bring into that program, not only be part of it, but also take part in it. And so you guys can drop me a LinkedIn message or drop me an email. My email is austin@getclarify.ai.
I love it. I love the intentionality around community that you have. I think it's so important, and certainly something in our DNA at GTM Fund all the way back from the Sales Hacker days. So love that you're making that a priority. Well, Austin, thank you again, man. Really enjoyed this hour hanging out with you. And to all our listeners, I say it every week, but listening is one thing, executing is totally different. Hopefully, we sparked some ideas for you to go take a deep look at your RevTech stack, maybe reevaluate a few things, and we'll see you all next week.